Ceylon tea, for your viewers who don't know, is tea that is exclusively from Sri Lanka. It's tea that is grown there, it's tea that is picked there, tea that is produced there. That is what we call Ceylon tea.
So pure, unadulterated, unmixed tea is Ceylon tea.
That is what Ceylon tea is. There's 4 different types of tea that you can make. You can make white tea, you can make green tea, you can make oolong tea, and you can make black tea. 1983 had 150 men registered on his estate to come to work. 150 men. So when he came to do pruning, he had enough men to do this.
Sure.
Today, that same tea estate has 30 men registered. They'll probably have 15 people turn up to work. The same acreage to do in terms of work. So how do you meet pruning standards? So I think, for us as an industry going forward with the challenges that we have with labor, with environment, the only way that you can really keep this going is to produce quality tea and charge a premium for it.
We are looking at 2 different playing fields here. Do you see that as a strength of our production or perhaps a possible weakness in relation to international competitiveness? To talk about Ceylon tea, a premium range, internationally recognized name, Ceylon tea, I have with me today Mr. Dananjaya Silva of PMD Tea. Welcome, Dananjaya, to this program.
Thank you for having me, Rohan.
My pleasure. So, PMD Tea and Ceylon tea, they go hand in hand in the international circuit. We will talk about PMD tea and its origins in a while. Let's look at Ceylon tea as a premium brand. You're the expert. I will ask all the questions. Walk us through what Ceylon tea, the brief history, and also today's the premium that we command on this quality product.
Yep. Absolutely.
Floor is yours.
So Ceylon tea, for your viewers who don't know, is tea that is exclusively from Sri Lanka. It's tea that is grown there, it's tea that is picked there, tea that is produced there. That is what we call Ceylon tea.
So this is pure, unadulterated, unmixed tea is Ceylon tea.
That is what Ceylon tea is. So, I mean, in the international market, you find a lot of teas that claim they're Ceylon, but if you read the labels at the back, you'll start to see, tea from Sri Lanka, tea from other areas. Yeah. But in the strict sense, Ceylon tea is tea that is from Sri Lanka. For those of you who are wondering, well, why do we call it Ceylon tea? It's our old colonial name of the island. It's what, when we started growing tea, the island was known as, and it was exported as Ceylon tea, and we've carried on calling it Ceylon tea ever since even the island has changed names.
Sure. So what are the types of tea? Because to someone who's not a tea expert or a connoisseur, they would say it's just a cup of tea.
That's right.
We had this with coffee as well in the United Kingdom.
Yep.
Coffee was a plain cup of coffee, but now we know. And in the past, coming from the Victorian days of the United Kingdom, there were tea houses instead of coffee cafes.
Absolutely.
So, again, can you describe the types of tea that is available in the market, as well as the differences or the distinctions between them, and which brands or the flavors are supplied from Sri Lanka?
Sure. So in general tea globally, we would say there are 4 types of tea. Tea, first of all, to define it, would be tea that comes from the Camellia sinensis plant, which is the tea plant. And there's 4 different types of tea that you can make. You can make white tea, you can make green tea, you can make oolong tea, and you can make black tea.
What's oolong tea?
So oolong tea is semi-oxidized tea. It's tea that sits between green tea, which isn't oxidized, and black tea, which is fully oxidized. So oolong tea is a semi-oxidized type of tea. And these are the 4 types of tea that you can make from the tea plant. Today, the tea plant grows in many parts of the world. It started off life in China, It grows in India, it grows in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, many parts of East Africa. Argentina, even very close to home. We're shooting this here in the UK. There are people who are growing tea in Wales, up in Scotland, and I, until this winter, had a few tea plants knocking around in my garden, but the winter weather took them out, unfortunately. So we grow tea in many parts of the world. So what we call Ceylon tea is tea that comes from Sri Lanka. The vast majority of the tea that we produce in Sri Lanka is black tea. That's what our teas are known for. But we also make a small amount of green tea. We also make some very quality white teas as well on the island. And you're starting to see some oolong teas coming through. But we grow tea in all parts of the world. And what makes Ceylon tea different is that depending on where in the world you grow your tea, you will have a distinct taste and flavor that will come from that part of the world.
So Sri Lanka has a unique climate for the production of a premium product, Ceylon tea?
Absolutely, and we have a exceptionally unique climate. And not only that, if you start to break down through Ceylon tea, we have 7 different agro-growing regions.
All right, 7.
7 different agro-growing regions. The highest agro-growing region is Norelia. The lowest agro-growing region is Rohan, which takes in districts
the low country,
Gaul, Martha, and we have everything in between.
So the quality or the taste of all of these products differ?
Absolutely, Ron. They differ drastically. A Rohan tea will be very different to a Norelia tea, and this is because the elevation is different, the climate is different, the flora and fauna are different, the lay of the land is different. But if you then took each region and you chopped it up into its districts, or you went from district down to the actual estate level, no 2 tea estates in the same district, in the same region, will give you the same taste and flavor.
Right.
Because the taste and flavor of a tea will change, even down to the way that the way that it'll change down to the type of tea plant a tea estate is planting. It'll change to the type of equipment they're using, the type of manufacture they're doing. I mean, on one estate it could be raining, the other estate it might not be. All of these things have an effect on the type of tea that comes out.
I see. So I'm a bit confused here, because if Sri Lanka produces different types of teas dependent on the varying climatic conditions in Sri Lanka, the high grown teas as well as the low country teas and everything in between, do you not have to then mix those teas to get a uniform commercial blend? So
absolutely. When you go further down the tea chain, when you come to creating a blend, you would absolutely be searching for certain flavors from certain regions. You would also be looking to blend, because if you're relying on a district or region, that district's region and region's flavor and taste of tea will change depending on the climatic conditions. So if you're looking to create a consistent product, you would be looking to blend teas from various parts of the island and various estates.
So just trying to draw a parallel here with the whiskies.
Yes.
So we have blended whiskies and single malts, etc. Yep. So the single malt has a premium quality product.
Yes.
We're talking whiskey here. So in the tea jargon, would it be a single origin tea that is the best tea, or does it work?
If you were saying the best tea, I mean, personally, I think it depends really on who you speak to. So to keep with your sort of whiskey analogy, I would say, the purest form of tea drinking would be to drink single estate tea.
Right.
Seasonal single estate teas that really capture a moment in time, because we're blessed in Sri Lanka. We have 2 quality producing times of the year that affect 2 different areas of the country. So if you take January, February, traditionally, the western side of the island, in the districts of the regions of the Mulla, will produce better quality teas. The climatic conditions change, that it allows for a quality cup of tea to come around. Compare that to the same district or region in June, July, where you've got monsoon rains. The flavor will be very different. At the same time, if you go to July, August, uva teas will really peak in flavor. So I think the real beauty of tea drinking is actually drinking single estate teas, that come from one tea estate, that are seasonal, because you're able to enjoy a period of time that nature creates with real craftsmanship, that you're able to capture and you're able to enjoy. It's not something that you can enjoy every day, and it's something that if you find a really nice tea, it's something you'll always try and look forward to the year after. And some years it comes and some years it doesn't, but that's really the beauty of what true tea drinking is like. And to compare it to your whiskey analogy, I would say it's similar to, you've got blended, you've got single malt. I would say single estate seasonal tea drinking is like finding single cask whiskey.
I see.
So you have one cask that you happen to find that's exceptional.
Yeah.
You finish that cask, it's finished, and now you're out hunting casks in warehouse again. That's what seasonal estate seasonal tea is like.
That's a perfect analogy and an explanation, because it sometimes gets confused to the lay person, the normal average tea drinker.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Dananjaya, in relation to the marketing of Ceylon tea from Sri Lanka, both the government of Sri Lanka as well as the private sector, the various different companies that we have, a successful market there as an industry, as an enterprise. How do you see or view the present marketing aspects of this famous brand? I know it's a long topic, but we are on a 20 or 30-minute program.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think, Ceylon tea, first of all, I think we should ask why had Ceylon tea become famous? And I think we need to go back to our sort of colonial era to really understand that. So to give a brief history, tea originally came from China. It came to Britain, and the British loved their tea. They then subsequently went out to China, started to bring in more tea, realized that because the Chinese only sold their tea for precious metal, they were running out of precious metal, they needed to look for other sources. So they sent out these sort of intrepid British pioneers, one, to go out and smuggle tea from China, and two, to find areas, initially in India, to grow tea. And they started growing tea in Assam. Many of you would have heard of Assam tea, in around 1830. At the same time, in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then known, we were growing coffee. We had our coffee disease.
That's another brand, Ceylon Coffee.
Ceylon Coffee. By 1865, we're actually the world's largest coffee exporter.
Yeah.
And by we had our coffee disease that set in, destroyed our coffee estates, and then we swapped to growing tea. Our tea that we made then was vastly owned by British business and by British entrepreneur capitalists. There were also Sri Lankans that were involved in the growing of tea and who had estates. But all of those teas that were made in country were sent back to London. Those people who had set up these estates were very conscious that their tea was not mixed in with Indian tea. Indian teas had come up. They'd already had a 30-year head start. Because they'd been bringing tea up to London, but we also had a very big head start when we started to grow our tea, because we didn't make a lot of the mistakes that they had made in India. No one had grown tea outside of China, so we had a blueprint of what worked in India and what didn't work, and we were able to really have a big head start. At the same time, those same Ceylon producers that had business interests here set about building this brand Ceylon tea, and they focused it solely on quality.
In the UK?
In the UK. And bear in mind, the UK was a huge market, because the London Tea Auction controlled, I believe, 85% of the world's tea passed through London. It's astonishing for a city that grows no tea, and a country that grows no tea, because it would come here, be used for home market in the UK, but it would also go out for re-export to all those other markets.
Exactly. So like the East End of London, the St. Catherine docks and so on.
Precisely.
Catherine's docks, yeah.
Precisely.
Now what we call the Docklands.
Yep, the Docklands. I mean, warehouses full of tea. Mincing Lane was where the tea auction was. So Ceylon tea, we had producers who started to lobby lobby, brand owners here in the UK that we made quality tea and saw that quality tea was made, and they did a vast amount of campaigning for Ceylon tea to have its place, but also made quality tea back home in Sri Lanka as well. So the taste really did come through in the cup.
That's a great insight into the what to you it's the known history, but to a lot of us the unknown history of Ceylon tea. Let's come to the present and look to the future.
Yep.
You mentioned London tea auctions. We have in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, the Colombo tea auctions. Do we still have London auctions?
We don't have London auctions. I believe they ceased in June of '98. Ironically, the last tea that was sold in London was a tea from Helboda Estate, which is in Kandy region. Ceylon tea was the last tea that was sold. I believe it went for £555 a kilo. And that was the final lot.
And even then, it was 1998.
It was 1998. The final lot was Ceylon tea that was auctioned. So
if we have a Colombo tea auction, how does one market the Indian teas, the Chinese teas, the East African teas? Is there another auction market elsewhere?
So one of the reasons why we no longer have a London auction is because the producer countries have come of age and they have built their own auctions up.
I see. So it's decentralized.
It's decentralized. So you have an auction that sits in Colombo. It's the world's largest single origin auction. You have an auction that sits in Mombasa, which sells tea from Kenya and East Africa. Collectively, that comes into Mombasa. You have auctions that sit in Calcutta, and pretty much all around the world where we grow tea. So today, if you're a foreign buyer, let's say you're a buyer in Britain, you will appoint buyers in those respective markets. So you'll have a buyer for your Ceylon teas, you'll have a buyer for your Kenyan teas, buyer for your Indian teas, and whatever other origins you operate in, and you will instruct that buyer to buy a certain taste and quality and price for what you're looking for.
And as far as mature quality teas are concerned, is the United Kingdom or Europe still a premium place as a customer, or is it the Middle East countries like Iraq or perhaps even Russia? I mean, how do you see our Ceylon tea, where the markets are?
So Russia is a big market for Ceylon tea. The Middle East is a very big market. Britain used to be a very big market for our tea, but we have lost this as a market.
How did we lose that market?
Well, I think one of the reasons we lost that as a market was really twofold. One, when we nationalized our tea estates in the early 70s, British business lost its interest in Ceylon plantations. So they didn't really have a need to put Ceylon tea into their blends. The other issue that we had was that you had new producer markets like Kenya that came in. Ironically, through some of our national policies, many tea planters from Sri Lanka went out to help the fledgling Kenyan tea industry. Yeah. And they were able to produce tea at a far cheaper price than what we were able to in Sri Lanka. We learned from India's mistakes.
And they learned from us.
They learned from us, so they realized putting tea on big gradient slopes wasn't probably the way to go about things, and maybe flatter lands that were high grown were better. And also the other thing that really changed for us in this market especially was the rise of the tea bag. Yes. And I say this to people all the time. Today, consumers in this market, if you're buying tea from the supermarket, they don't buy tea, they buy packaging. Because if you actually opened a tea bag, whether it be brand A or brand B, the quality of ingredients that go into the actual bag is very similar. Yes, the taste will differ because they've blended it to give different tastes and flavors. But essentially, a consumer no longer buys tea; they buy packaging, so they don't know what tea they buy. And in Sri Lanka, we still produce a vast majority of large leafy teas which aren't suitable for tea bags. So those are bought by customers that still buy leafy teas, like in the Middle East, like in Russia, where they don't want tea bags.
So the tea bags contain not leafy teas, but am I allowed to say, is it tea dust or what is it?
I wouldn't say. Well, initially it used to be tea dust, but there are two methods of producing tea. You have the orthodox method, which is, I guess, the old way of making tea. This is where you'll have up to 25 different leaf grades of full-size tea.
I get it.
Which will give you, when you brew it, it'll give you a faster liquoring tea, a darker cup, a stronger cup full of caffeine, but it won't give you those nuanced flavors that we spoke about at the beginning, where you can taste region, where you can taste elevation. It doesn't give you that. Ideally suited for tea bags, but probably doesn't favor an environment like what we have in Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka. And as a tea producing and tea selling nation, do we do the CTCTs on a commercial scale?
We do a little bit of CTC, but on the whole, we have stuck to producing tea in the orthodox manner. So if you go to the Low Country, the vast majority of Low Country estates will produce tea in the orthodox manner. They'll have grades from orange pekoe right the way down to broken orange pekoe fannings in the old style, large leafy teas.
So do you see that as a strength of our production, or perhaps a possible weakness in relation to international competitiveness?
I see it as a huge strength, because I see it as a huge strength because, look, the tea that you make in one tea estate is not the same as what you make in another one. And we're one of the few countries, for such a small island, to have 7 different agro-growing regions, to have such a wide variety of taste and flavor, to then say, look, we're going to go and we're going to make CTC tea, we're going to really boil the leaf, just give thick colory teas. We're not playing to our strengths, because then if we are to make a product like that, it then comes to how much are you willing to sell your product for, and how much are other producers willing to sell their product for. And when it comes to price, we're never going to be able to compete. And really, what made, I think we should always stick true to the blueprint of what made Ceylon Tea famous. It was the fact that we made aromatic, flavorful teas. And if we stick to that, we'll always be a successful industry. Because us as a business, we sell teas that fit that old blueprint. And we do, when we sell into the Horeca sector, into B2B, we have people who come onto our website simply based on the taste and quality of the tea. They're asking, minus any branding, what is this tea? We want to take some of this home. That's based solely on the taste in the teacup. So
to improve the marketability or the amount of dollars one can make, in the UK, it's of course pounds and pence, we should stick to the quality tea that we produce as opposed to the mass market.
Absolutely, Rohan. I think also you have to also factor in some of the real issues that we have currently in Sri Lanka. So on one of the sides is, how could we produce tea in vast quantity going forward when we have a real labor problem?
I was going to come to that, but please proceed on that, because there is a huge labor problem, shortage of labor, as well as increase in daily wages. I'm sure everyone would like to have more money.
Of course,
you and I included, if you're working on the tea estates.
Absolutely.
But how do you square that?
I think you square that by look, first of all, look at some of the issues that we have. One of them is labor. So if you take our high-grown estates, we have a legacy business here in that the British built these estates. They had resident labor. Initially, when they built them as coffee estates, they had a small workforce, and they brought in labor from South India for a picking season, because coffee was very seasonal, and that labor at the end of that picking season would go back, and you'd have a small workforce that stayed on this estate. When we swap to tea, you need to pluck a tea bush ideally every 7 days. So you need to have vast working populations to be able to do this. And if you look at this from a family business perspective, if you look at in my grandfather's time, my seer's time, the amount of labor that a tea estate had at its disposal, they could very easily keep a 7-day plucking round, because they had enough labor to do that. Not only that, you have other jobs like pruning. You have other jobs like road maintenance, because you have a huge road network inside a tea estate.
Yep.
For all this is where you have a lot of your male labor working on in pruning, in digging, in road networks. So you need a lot of people to do this. And I mean, I was recently up on a tea estate, probably about going back a year back and having this same conversation. A friend of mine who was on a tea estate in Bogontalawa in 1983 had 150 men registered on his estate to come to work. 150 men. So when he came to do pruning, he had enough men to do this.
Sure.
Today, that same tea estate has 30 men registered. They'll probably have 15 people turn up to work. The same acreage to do in terms of work. So how do you meet pruning standards? You can't, because you don't have the amount of people to do it. And that's the same thing when it comes to plucking. I mean, I remember when I learned on a tea estate in Maskelia, we had 1,500 total labor workforce on that estate. Now it's dropped below 1,000. I think it's like below 800 at the same acreage. The number of tea bushes hasn't changed. The number of labor has. So, some real questions need to be asked in how do we maintain a 7-day picking round? And it's so important that you maintain that, because you want to pick the top 2 leaf in a bud not when it's too young, but not when it's too mature either. So maintaining a 7-day round and doing these things on time is crucial. And running an agriculture business is very different to, let's say, running a restaurant. You can't turn the lights off and finish for the day. Yeah. There is no finish for the day. This is a plant that's growing and it needs constant care and attention. So labor is a big issue when we take our industry forward. Going for a quantity model, we're never going to meet that and meet that at global competitive prices. What we should be looking to meet is, in many ways, going back to the old Ceylon standards and making, even for the upcountry, which very rarely does this now, making leafy, orthodox teas minus the rotovane. So stop making, grades like broken orange pekoe fanning, dust 1, because these are teas that eventually go into tea bags.
Yeah. The
tea bag consumer is not concerned about quality because, like I said to you, they're not buying tea, they're buying packaging.
Absolutely.
So I think, for us as an industry going forward with the challenges that we have with labor, with environment, the only way that you can really keep this going is to produce quality tea and charge a premium for it. And there are people in the world who will pay a premium.
With the land acreage, or in modern language, the hectares available, Sri Lanka has a finite landscape for the growing of tea, as opposed to India, which has a huge land base. So is East African. So are East African countries.
Yes.
So I think we are looking at 2 different playing fields here.
We're looking at 2 different playing fields, and I think we, as a nation, as an industry, probably also need to shift our mindset from the mindset of 70, 80, even 100 years ago. It has shifted. I mean, even 70 years ago, there was only 4 countries that really produced tea. When it came to World War II in this country, Sri Lanka effectively provided the vast majority of tea that was drunk by Britain and British troops and the Commonwealth in World War II, because China wasn't an option to buy tea from. Indonesia had fallen to the Japanese. The British were extremely afraid that the Japanese would march over the Burmese border and take over the tea estates of Assam. So there's only one country left. That was ourselves. That's not the environment we're living in today. We're growing tea in such vast areas of the world. We as a nation, as an industry, have to adapt to that change.
So as a person who has been in the tea industry, I'm going to say from birth.
Okay.
We'll come to that because you're a 3rd generation family business. Let's talk about that in a few moments. What's your best advice to government or the tea authorities? Yes, as a Sri Lankan, but as an international Sri Lankan living overseas, looking at Sri Lanka from outside. That's the most important thing, because it's like the, once you are outside, you see a different picture.
Absolutely.
Any advice or tips that you can give on this channel?
I think a lot of the stuff I think that we should be doing going forward today is really back in the history books when it comes to our industry, because today to give your viewers an idea, we really have two sectors to our tea industry. The low-grown sector that came, in the sort of 30s, 40s, that's run by smallholders, individuals who own, small areas of land, as big as a car parking space all the way up to half an acre or maybe even an acre. They farm their own land. They provide that leaf to private tea factory owners that are in the south. The upcountry model is that colonial legacy. Large tracts of land, worker populations, which are now post-1992. So to put a bit of context into this, those estates were established by entrepreneur capitalists, whether they be British or whether they be Sri Lankans. In the 70s, we nationalized all of that land. We took it under two government agency sort of houses, the SLSPC and the JEDB. And by 91, 92, the government realized, surprisingly, we're not very good at running tea estates. Maybe we should do something and change this. So we ran that back. We essentially leasehold that out to private companies, and that's broken into 26 different regional plantation companies that own our tea land on a leasehold basis for 50 years.
Right.
I think a large part of what we need to do is look at what happened in the past. And if you take these large regional plantation companies as an example, you today have a tea estate, which is the amalgamation of what they will call divisions. So a tea estate might have up to 3 to 7 divisions, which before, those divisions were the tea estates. So if you visit, a particular estate today, take a division, that used to be a tea estate run by one small entrepreneur capitalist who made his tea. They would have a small factory there, and they would produce their tea, would give a very different taste and flavor to the division or to the estate next to it. These were smaller concerns that people could manage and people could run. When you're looking at such large hectareage, it makes sense for big business, because you look at it and you say, right, we've got 8 factories in this area. Why do we need to have 8 factories running? Why can't we just shut 2 down? We'll keep 6. We'll funnel the leaf from the other 2 into the other 6, and we'll bring down our cost of production. The problem with that is that you don't play to the strengths of Sri Lanka, and the strengths of Sri Lanka are the land where the tea is grown, the unique climate that we have. If you have it as a smaller, if you go back to the beginning of how our industry started, going back to that smaller owner-operated model, that's where I feel we'll have the most amount of success. And it also allows you to innovate to the market conditions. If you realize, look, if 99 people are making black tea, I've actually realized that for me, for my small acreage, actually, oolong tea would work better. I'm going to bring in some equipment. I'm going to change up how we're going to do things. You can start to create a different flavor in your area, and you can only really do that by having entrepreneur capitalists back on estates, being able to run them without having the kind of bureaucracy that we have had.
And do you think the entrepreneur capitalist businessmen are available locally in Sri Lanka, or do we have to look for foreign direct investments here? I think
to be honest, Rohan, I think if you take the southern sector, I love going down south to visit tea estates, because if you look, if my grandfather was alive today and he was to walk into many of the upcountry tea estates, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. In some cases, there are, and this is nice also to see, there are tea dryers that were made in Ireland before Ireland was partitioned in 1920.
Really?
And you know that they were made in Ireland before 1920 because they say Sirocco and it says Belfast Island. It doesn't even say Belfast Northern Ireland. The same dryer that he probably would have even transported up, actually probably not, because it was 1920 they were split in. He would still be at home, and he'd be able to name every bit of equipment. If you go down south today, the amount of things that they have thought of, color sorters, to just simple things like conveyor belts to lower to stay competitive. The beauty of the factories as well, they are constantly innovating that product because they own that product. And there are many instances down south where people larger companies have said, look, we have to shut this factory down. We can't do it. A tea factory owner has come in. The factory's been shut because they've said we can't get the leaf. Factory owners have come in, rebuilt the factory, put more leaf than has ever been put into that factory, and the factory and the community is thriving again. So it has been proved down south that this is possible, and we're doing it. I don't think we need to look outside of Sri Lanka to fix this problem. I think we have all the tools in country to fix it, and I think much of the sad point is that if you take Kenya's industry, many Sri Lankans built that for them.
Absolutely, yes.
Many Sri Lankans built that industry for them. So I think we have the intellectual capital.
And still, many Sri Lankans work there, do business from Mombasa.
Absolutely, and many people are going there because it offers a favorable business environment.
So we need to create a much better environment for trading here in Colombo.
Absolutely,
Sri Lanka.
Absolutely.
So, talking of tea, very interesting conversation so far, but I think we must refer to the fact that you are a third generation tea person from a tea family, if I can use those phrases. PMD teas, what does PMD mean, and what are the historical roots? And walk us through from there to yourself and what you're doing in the UK.
Sure. So PMD, the full name of the company is PM David Silva and Sons.
PM David Silva and Sons.
Right. So it was just abbreviated down to PMD.
So who's David Silva to you?
So David Silva is my grandfather.
Paternal grandfather.
My paternal grandfather, my father's father. He set up this business. He was born in the 1920s.
Right.
Came of age, I guess, in the 1930s. And when he was originally from southern Sri Lanka.
Whereabouts?
Down in Devinura. So
Devinura, yeah.
Doesn't get any further south than the
Donra Point.
Donra Point, absolutely. Doesn't get any further south. And then in the 1930s went up to Muscalia because, you have to bear in mind at that time, I think 2/3 of the Sri Lankan population were unemployed because of the Great Depression.
Oh, yes.
So the only area of the country that was really thriving at this point was upcountry and the tea estates.
So he went up Muscalia?
He went up to Muscalia and, sort of went there, started, as almost as a boy in those days, started working in a shop. Came back 5 years later and bought that shop on a tea estate called Brunswick.
So it's a real entrepreneurial success story there.
Absolutely, he was a very, a real hustler. Came out, bought that shop, Brunswick,
right.
in Muscalia, and then sort of grew his business from there to become a plantation supplier and tea transporter. And sort of incorporated himself, went into sort of diversified into other areas. Like rice milling into cinemas and things as well, and built that business and kind of went through a lot of changes. He went through, I guess when you look back on it, went through World War II, went through independence, went through nationalization, went through insurrections. So really,
all of those opportunities and challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was a self-discovered, self-made, successful entrepreneur turned businessman.
Absolutely.
So from there, you are the third generation. So how did it come to you, or what's the succession so far?
So how did it come to me is kind of an interesting story because I grew up here in England. So I was born here in England.
Where were you born?
I was born, ironically, just around the corner from where we're shooting this in East London. So I was born here, but I actually have no recollection of London when I was a child because at 9 months I was sent back to Sri Lanka. So my parents had sort of come here in the late 80s to study, late 70s to study, early 80s, had me, and then by 9 months I went to Sri Lanka. So my first memories are actually not of grey and gloomy England. It's actually of Sri Lanka. So if my
Sunny Sri Lanka as opposed to gloomy England.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
So went back to Sri Lanka. My first memories are there, and then came back here.
Did you study in Sri Lanka or studied here?
No, so I came back when I was 3. Just before my 3rd birthday, I had come back and then went to school here for 2 years, then went back to Sri Lanka, studied there for another 2.5, and came back here when I was about 8, and then stayed here from 8 onwards.
You have had the best of both worlds.
I've had the best of both worlds and a real sort of mix of both, and tried to kind of find where I kind of place myself.
I mean, sometimes it's difficult when you're a second generation, or I call them third generation Brits, connecting to linking either with the country of your birth or the country of your paternal or parental origins.
Absolutely.
But it's a fine balance, and I think what you're promoting with PMDTs in the UK and internationally, you sort of kept that link, the balance, the bridge, and all of that.
Absolutely. I think, and to answer your question, how did I get into it? I had sort of, grown up here. I'd never thought, I'd never really done too well at school, because I was too much of a, I don't know, if I went to school today, I would be diagnosed with ADHD, ADD, probably have a Ritalin inhaler, strapped to me.
All of that.
So I'd always wanted to do something outside, and I honestly thought I would join the Royal Marines here, and that had been my sole focus. When I finished university, I went traveling, and there'd always been, I don't know, an entrepreneurial side to me anyway. So when I was at school, I would do sideline businesses, some that worked, some that didn't. I'd always been quite a disruptive person, so I think environments where there was a lot of authority didn't really suit me, which is kind of ironic, wanting to join the Marines. But went traveling, saw an opportunity, and then went out to Sri Lanka to really learn about tea. Only because I wanted to be outside. I didn't want to get a job here, or I didn't want to start pursuing a career. I thought I'd want to spend a bit more time outside. A tea estate looked like a great place. A lot of outdoor-based work, and through that, fell in love with tea. And then through that, saw a real gap in the market, not just here, but also in how we could position our business, because it was a tea transporting business and a plantation supplier. But realized, when I saw that there wasn't really a lot of future in that business. That industry hadn't really innovated, hadn't really been allowed to innovate as well in some ways.
Sure.
So made a change and made a shift, and here we are some years later.
Great. And thank you so much, Dananjaya, for sharing both your business and professional thoughts about the tea industry, the famous Ceylon Tea brand, of course, your own company, PMDT, and also about yourself and the family business. So on that pleasant note, I would like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I wish you all the very best in everything you do. All the very best.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.